Hey, welcome back to Chris Anderson Comics. I'm once again joined with Rocko Jerome, and he's here today to talk about the Masters of the Universe. Uh, some of the mini comics, more the books, right?
Yeah,
More the
yeah.
mini
It's um,
comics.
it's always funny to me when people talk about them. They call them mini comics, but they're not really comics at all. They're like little storybooks. Um,
Well, those were storybooks. These were mini comics that
right.
came.
Yes.
Those are a
Yes.
little later.
The
These are
ones that
actually
most.
my first comics,
Yeah, I
and
think that's probably a lot of us.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Mark Texiera did the artwork of the very first ones of these mini comics of Ghost Rider and Sabretooth
Yeah.
and Union at Image fame.
Yeah.
Awesome artwork.
Yeah.
But
Very, very cool.
but before those, there was something else. So
Right.
give him a show.
Yeah. Alfredo Alcala was the artist on these little booklets. I've been carrying this thing around since I was, I think, 4 years old. This is one of my oldest possessions. The figures would come with these things, right? And
So
this
here's
has
the
got
cover of that one.
dried out pieces of tape that my mom put on there when I was just a little boy, because I read through these books until they, started to fall apart. And some
Right.
of my most treasured belongings here.
Oh man, look at that back.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, this
amazing.
is like just burned into my memory, right?
Yeah.
The interesting thing about Masters of the Universe, so something I recommend everyone do who's interested in all the sort of cultural details of toys and the things that we're obsessed with and the interests that we have is at some point go to like a GI Joe convention
Okay.
and almost as a sociological experiment and notice the difference in the ways that the people who grew up on the GI Joe Real American Hero small figures
Yes.
are different from the boomers who grew up with the 12-inch figures.
Those would be my brothers.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
They
always
were
kind of
born in the late 50s, early 60s, and I was born in the mid 70s.
there
So,
you go. Yeah, that's exactly it.
yes.
That's the
So I know
demarcation.
all about them.
So the way that the boomer guys are like into their stuff is that they're sort of engaged in their imagination in a different way than the people who are into things that came out in the 80s.
Yeah.
There's this sort of thing where it was like there wasn't a lot of mythology to GI Joe. GI Joe was a guy, and who the guy is up to the kid, right? If the kid
Mhm.
isn't very imaginative, he just bangs GI Joe against the wall. If the kid is really imaginative and tends to be one of the types of people who would still go to a convention today and take up space there, they had whole stories that they would invent with their GI Joes, right? They would have a whole thing in their head of what these things were because it was never told to them how to play with their toys in that way. It was all
Right.
just imagination, right? So one of the interesting things that happened with GI Joe through the 70s was the extreme unpopularity of the Vietnam War and how that affected toys and the way that moms especially would buy toys for their kids. War toys were suddenly very unpopular
Yeah.
because there was dudes getting drafted, not coming back wrong. A lot of things made people not so into the idea of GI Joe, which is why he grew a beard and became really into camping, right? And the whole adventure team thing happened, and all these things that have kind of been erased from hit by history. The kung fu grip, like this was the stuff that came out of there. Like the idea of this guy getting a gun and shooting somebody was very unpopular. So action figures in the 70s, it was kind of a loaded prospect, right? But there was a lot of different toys that came out where uh, it was up to the kid what the story was. The sort of the marketing machine wasn't so powerful yet that they were on the page of like how to market things to children in such a way that a kid would be obsessed with the stuff for their whole life. More people or more kids would get into it and become good consumers of the merchandise forever. One of the things that was sort of a offshoot of GI Joe was a character called Big Jim. Right, Big
Yes.
Jim was like a slightly smaller version of this kind of action figure, like a GI Joe type guy. Right,
Yeah.
and Big Jim played soccer. He did karate. It was like the way that Barbie is for girls. Boys had that too. There was not really like, what does your Barbie do? Is your Barbie married to Ken? Does your Barbie just date Ken? Is your Barbie a lesbian? What does your Barbie do? It's up to the kid. There's no story that tells them what they need to do. So what the toy companies would look at, like Mattel, is the way that comic books were inspiring this obsessive readership and fan base, right? And they wanted to find a way to sort of like tap into that. So in, I believe, 1974, they had the idea to try to give Big Jim, or 1975 rather, sort of his own group of other characters that they could get kids to buy. And that's something that is probably familiar to a lot of people that like old comics. Big Jim's pack, right?
Yes.
Look at this group of reprobates. And it's funny because like these dudes look like ex-cons, right?
Yeah, they do.
They look like bad people that you wouldn't want your kids to be playing with the toys. And a guy who was a friend of mine, I am very fortunate to say, who also has a big part in Masters of the Universe lore, is William Stout. He's a guest every year at Wonderfest, and he and I have become chums over the years. And he was the first person who Mattel approached to talk to about this Big Jim rebranding that they wanted to do, right? This whole idea of like making Big Jim something else. And all the art that they showed him to try to get him into the idea of what he would be doing was all Jack Kirby Marvel Comics art. And he said, well, okay, I could do an impersonation of the guy you want, or I can give you the phone number of the guy you want. His name is Jack Kirby. And they were like, oh, well, all right, shit, whatever. So Jack Kirby got the phone call, and he got to do all this Big Jim work, right?
Yeah.
This is not an original box. I'm not that much of a baller to have an original box, but this is the original figure, and then I have a repop in the box.
Okay.
Right, but I actually have repops of all the different characters. So that was how, and this is the reason that I said all this, that was how Jack Kirby came to work for Mattel.
Okay.
Right? And there was something going on that we all were altered by in our childhoods and made us consumers in a kind of a way that no kids before us ever were. And that was that President Reagan deregulated television, children's television, to where it could now contain advertisements and in effect be advertisements. Kids could get marketed to directly in a way that they were protected from in the past, right? By the way that things worked. Right. There were toys based on obviously comic books, you know, Migos, Captain Action, all that sort of stuff. But it was never like, here is the way to play with the toy. Here is why you should be obsessed with a toy and why you should bother your parents until they buy you all of this stuff, because we're going to make you a fan. We're going to make you a lifetime subscriber to what we're beaming into your head, right? Star Wars did that too. So that was something that was a big influence. So Mattel developed the ideas of doing this Masters of the Universe thing, right? And it was all just purely the ideas that they poured into it. It was a fairly cynical endeavor. They just sort of would do test markets with kids, and it's like, hey, you like war? You like guns? You like barbarians? You like space age stuff? You like science fiction? We're just going to cram all of that into one thing. And we don't care what the story is. We're just going to cram it all together, and we're going to make kids obsessed with it.
Sure.
But they also sort of de facto managed to be not only the last toy line that didn't have a major toy line that didn't have a big media property tied into it to get kids, it was also the first one that did. Right? Okay. It was kind of both those things. It was a toy line that they didn't know what it was, and kids could kind of come up with their own ideas of what the toys were. But it was also the first one where it's like, oh no, we're going to make these cartoons into commercials for the kids, and we're going to just like laser into their heads, and we're going to make them want to buy this stuff. And that was what it was all about. So The comics that we're going to look at here are forgotten by time. And a lot of kids didn't even have these or see these or know anything about them, because this was the original thing that Masters of the Universe was. It
Right.
was super gritty, grimy for kids, violent, lurid thing that was already sort of getting concerns that were parallel to sort of the satanic panic of the 80s. And this was the reason that the cartoon was as goofy as it is. That there's a secret identity for this barbarian, and there's like a lesson in everyone. Like, they were trying really hard to not get in trouble, while they also were just downloading all this information into kids' heads to make them want these toys more than anything on earth.
Sure. So I don't remember how these were packaged with the toy. Was it in the plastic with them?
Yeah, there's
the mini
card.
comics.
Yeah, there's the card, and then there's the little comic behind
Yeah.
the figure, the little booklet behind the figure, and then the figure. And it was like the package was such that it was positioned so that the figure was just so. So later on, there were mini comics, and these days they were like storybooks. Like, they weren't quite doing comics yet.
In the very beginning. Yep.
Yeah. So how these things were created was that this Alfredo Alcala would, I think he would do the art, and I think they sort of Marvel methoded it to get this guy Don Glut to write these stories. But as we'll see as we get into this, like, the mythology really slips and slides around. It's really sort of
and quickly.
Yes, it moves very quickly. So no kid could really resist being able to just sort of surmise their own stories with these things. It wasn't yet just like laser focused into, this is how you play with these, this is who this character is. And these days it was still sort of a Wild West.
Yeah. So we'll open it up and we'll see He-Man is obviously not in his costume. He is a barbarian, and he has a tribe of people here. He's just carrying a spear.
Yeah. So it's so basic. And we're treated to just, I think these were like supposed to almost be like concept art. I don't even know if they meant for these to be a book ever. That was how little attention Mattel was paying to this stuff.
Right. So he's going to kind of go on a walkabout, and he's going to go into Eternia. He wants to see this legendary Castle Grayskull that he's heard so much about. And he knows that there's evil forces, around. And as he comes around a bend here, there's this green woman.
Yeah. And it's a green Tila, basically.
Yeah. And I think they ended up repurposing this monster to be a shadow beast or something later, kind of.
Yeah, probably so.
And they... is it here or is it the next page? They kind of refer to her as the sorceress.
Right.
So this is what the Tila action figure came wearing, this sort of snake outfit and the same clothes.
You can take that on and off, but the figure, of course, wasn't green, which is very frustrating to me as a kid.
She was not green.
He-Man here is about to rip this monster apart by its jaws, which is pretty
then she just zaps him.
Yeah. So like we're not playing around here. This isn't like we're not messing around. And this art was the earliest art that I was obsessed with. I mean, like, this stuff just like triggers things deep in the recesses of my brain. I was such a mark for this stuff. Like, they had me hook, line, and sinker at this point. Yeah.
Same, exact same. So they beat this creature together, and she's like, well, you're a huge, beefy guy. You must be the one who I've, been saving these magical items for all this time.
Yeah.
And so he's sort of got this magical, he doesn't have the power sword. It's just a sword. He's got an axe.
That's important too. His main weapon in these is the axe.
And he's got the shield. And then he has the straps that he wears over his chest sort of act as a force field for him.
Right. So one of the things that comes up in these a lot is that it sort of seems to hint that this is actually some sort of a post-apocalyptic world that warred itself into the predicament that they're in now. So
Very much like Thundar the Barbarian, where something has destroyed, and because obviously they're flying machines. They talk about scientists.
yes,
They'll speak about computers and things
right,
like that, but everybody is sort of back in the Stone Age.
right,
Now, He-Man, once he puts this stuff on, he becomes even stronger just by wearing this vest.
yeah.
So much that he is punching what we later find out is the strongest rock in
Yeah.
all of Eternia. And this is how he's building his house.
Yeah,
He's
he's gonna build
punching
a
a
house.
hole into the side of a
Yeah,
mountain to build a
it's so
house.
funny. It's clear that Glute was just looking at this art and just trying to figure out how to like when I read this as a kid, it wasn't any more or less confusing than it is now.
Yeah.
Riding in the strange vehicle, which was a combination battering ram, catapult, and space warp device. Like, what the fuck? Like, it's so out there. And
And
I love that about it.
if you remember, this part of the vehicle detached from the thing,
Yeah.
from a
Yep.
bigger
I
part
have
that
one here.
there you go. And then the
Yeah.
back of it shot off
Yeah.
like a orange, like a bullet kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, they talk about the battering ram, but it's not drawn here. But I guess if you bought the toy, you would know.
Yeah.
And then here we see this woman that they call the goddess.
Yeah.
With her unicorn, and around the corner we have this kind of very orange version of Beastman and Skeletor, kind of oogling over her, drooling, and then
Yeah.
he says, I'm really starting to believe that she is a goddess. And then Skeletor says, "Soon she'll be more than that," whispered his master Skeletor. "Soon she will be my bride."
Yeah.
So
they're really skating on the depths of like what is possible to get away with at this point, right?
Yep.
Like, we're still sort of at a time coming out of a time when like violent toys were not cool. There wasn't any rule against them, but companies weren't trying for that, you know. And we're in a new age here. We got a new president. We've got a new cultural sort of impetus.
But the goddess here, we find out her name is Tila, who is blonde. She's not gonna take it without a fight. And Skeletor is back here zapping her unicorn, which she never came with the unicorn. I'm surprised they didn't.
Yeah. No, a lot of this stuff, they weren't yet that keyed in. It's like they weren't yet on that tip of just like everything you see is available as a toy you can buy.
Well, case in point, on this page, I'll show you here that I noticed as I was going over this that I hadn't noticed before. So you've got Beastman carrying, the unconscious Tila. They're going to Castle Grayskull. You got Merman here. So this is Skeletor and his henchmen. One of the henchmen here is Stratos.
Yeah, right.
And Stratos is one of the heroes.
Yeah.
So they didn't even know what to call him yet, if he was good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah. All of this is just so very much prototypes of what they were doing. And they did not give a shit. Like we talked earlier about the Wonder Bread He-Man, which was something that you weren't familiar with before. But the Wonder Bread He-Man, a lot of people in the worlds of Masters of the Universe collectors actually thought this toy might be a hoax because it's so easy to fake one, right?
Yeah.
It's a brown-haired He-Man with black belt, black boots, and a black vest suit thing from.
Now he didn't come with that though, right? He didn't come with the vest.
Which?
The original Wonder Bread He-Man didn't come with a vest.
Yeah, this was what the Wonder Bread He-Man was thought to look like, at least in some instances, right?
Okay.
But some people said it wasn't even real to begin with.
Okay.
That it was all just people like tooling stuff together as an excuse to try to sell something that was something they actually had made some customizations to for more money, right? It was like 50-50 on whether or not it even existed because there was no record of what this He-Man, this Wonder Bread thing was. And the Wonder Bread Masters of the Universe promotion was like for a sticker or something. It wasn't even for a figure. So Wonder Bread He-Man is already like a misnomer, right?
Right.
And then what ended up happening was this guy called Toy Guru, that's his nickname, but if you look him up, that's who he is, was doing a book about the art of Masters of the Universe. And he found this thing where this Karen had written a letter to Mattel because she was pissed that her kids got this figure where it was a buy three, get one free figure. And it was a brown haired He Man. And I don't know what they thought it was going to be, but she was mad about it.
With no weapons.
It came with weapons.
Oh, he came with a stick or something, right?
Yeah, he came with like weapons that they also used in Castle Grayskull, right?
Yeah.
Or at least we think that. Like, it's so hard to figure out. Now, contrast and compare this to like you mentioned, like the Boba Fett with the firing missile.
Right.
That's something we know everything about. Kenner was a smaller company. Star Wars was this big mass cultural deal. Everything that had to do with Star Wars, there were people keeping record of. With Masters of the Universe, nobody gave a shit. Like what you're seeing here is just proof positive that nobody really gave a fuck what they were doing over at Mattel. It was just like, this is dumb shit for kids. We're going to make them obsessed with this stuff to the best of our ability. You look at some of the concept art for Masters of the Universe, and it's really kind of like frustrating and sad because, like, look at the detail that went into all these sorts of things that were supposed to be the concepts for toys that may or may not get made. And then what they ended up doing was just using the same molds over and over and over again, right? Because that was their business model, right?
Sure. It was sort of like the same business model as like the Hanna-Barbera animation, you know?
Yeah. And like the way they did Barbie. Barbie's the same body and you change the accessories. And I love all this stuff. But even as a kid, it's like, I remember when Faker came out, it was like, this is a blue. I know what this is. I know what you're doing. This is cheap. But I couldn't help it. I loved He-Man so much that I couldn't sin against the Masters of the Universe merchandising machine because I believed in it so much.
Well, you know, it's funny. I did I do my bootleg Masters of the Universe comics for people who join my Patreon and send them out. And the first two that I did were kind of explaining why Beastman and Mossman, look the same. They were the same mold. And why. And the second one was Merman and Stinkor, why they look the same. It was the same mold. And it's really funny to the people who come up to me at conventions and are like, oh, I didn't even realize they were the same mold, and I played with them my whole life. And it's really funny how easy it was for them to pull the wool over kids' eyes.
I was never fooled.
No, neither was I.
Yeah, we were the
excessive, but so
that's
many
why we
people
make comics and shit. Like, we were those types of people who were never going to let it go. Who noticed those things and just, like Stand By Me when the kid is like, why is Pluto a dog and Goofy's a dog? How is that possible? Like, the kids, we're the geeks who obsess over the shit and make fun of it later in life,
Yeah.
But this is also why nobody seems to be able to answer the question of whether or not any Jack Kirby stuff was involved in the making of Masters of the Universe.
Okay.
And the fact of the matter is, maybe it was. Maybe they had a bunch of Kirby stuff and we just don't know because they didn't even care. They didn't know or care. I mean, it was just like, I don't know. This is Kirby as fuck, as observed by you.
It is.
Like, that could have easily been a Kirby concept. Who knows? Nobody knows. Nobody at Mattel was paying attention. They didn't give a shit.
Yeah. That's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a trip.
This is some of my favorite depictions of Skeletor with his just janked up teeth. Look at those teeth. Like, what?
Yeah, this guy is a scary freak. And we see that Skeletor is one of a race of guys who all look like him.
Yes.
And
he's from another dimension.
That we hint at here is that Castle Grayskull contains a bunch of technology from before all the nukes started going off.
Yes. Right? That's the secret.
And this whole deal with these swords is that, and this is why it's like this too. Skeletor has half of one and He-Man has the other. And it's purple and silver. And you put them together and then you use that to open Castle Grayskull. Right?
So one toy had a male connector, one toy had a female connector, and you could put them together into one sword.
And this is why these toys were like this. Like, all of this stuff, all this mythology, such as it is, just went away and was replaced by all the corny cartoon stuff.
Such a trip.
Yeah.
There's stuff, going on in here. we meet Man-at-Arms, who is from a race of people who are just very good at weapons.
Yeah.
And Tim Seeley and I both take the stance that Man-at-Arms has no mustache.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The things that were different in the cartoon, which came out when I was in kindergarten, it was like I went to kindergarten and this cartoon came out around the same time. Like it was,
yeah.
like, I think I was going to school for a week before the cartoon came out. Mm-hmm. And it was my first episode 1 moment, that fandom type thing where it's like, this is different and I don't like it, but I have to like it because this is my religion. Like I believe in this and this is what I'm about. So I have to roll with it, you know?
Yeah.
So I convinced myself that I loved it when in fact I don't think I did.
Yeah, I think that it's the very same thing. I loved the designs and I loved, you know, when I played, it wasn't like He-Man as Adam. Definitely not.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's the kind of the beauty of this property. And I think it's something that Mattel really needs to take advantage of when they talk to, you know, Dark Horse and stuff like that. And, you know, the Seeley comics kind of have done this like multiverse thing where there's different kind of storylines and things being done. But there's so many different ways that you can tell the story and so many different origins and ways that you could tell the story of these characters. For example, you know, and just keep going with like a million different versions of it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, so much of it just goes back to the fact that, like I said, this was the last toy line, major toy line, where there wasn't much of a story. The kid made it up. And then it was the first one where it was like, no, here is the story. This is what the story is. It's in the cartoon. Watch it every day. Beg your mom for these toys. Let's go back 1 page because this is a funny thing.
Sure.
Thank you very much. It says here, all of a sudden, He-Man is his more barbarian self. So for this 1 page, throwing off his damaged force field costume, He-Man hurried down the castle elevator. So like, all of a sudden, he took all of his clothes off so that he could fight Skeletor.
Yeah, but then on the next page, he's like got it back on.
He's got him again.
I noticed that too.
Sheer madness. And it was
here you get the sorceress.
Right. All this this is Don Glut trying to figure out ways to try to make some sort of a narrative to this.
I love it.
And the fact that they failed so miserably meant that a kid's imagination was sparked in a way that kids don't really get sense out of these types of toys, at least.
Yeah. She's still blonde here. She's still green now. These will become the same toy.
Yeah.
They'll actually change the sorceress into a completely different character at some point.
Yes. Right. Well, the cartoon, you know.
And the you know, they chase him off in the distance, and the spirit of Castle Grayskull actually speaks to them.
Yes. Yeah. Absolute madness. Sheer madness.
Yeah. So she banished the power swords so no one can ever find them.
Yeah. But of course they're back again in the next story.
Yeah, they are back again because he tracks them down. So now we get Teela back here.
Yeah.
And now her hair is red.
Right.
But not quite the way that they have it now.
Yeah. Like this starts to contradict things. Like the mythology of this is so all over the place. But it really does lead to just, you know, a triggering of the imagination that I'm glad that I got to experience at the age that I did before it became the religion that it ended up becoming, right?
Yeah.
Anytime you see it, this is a total bootleg toy from Mexico that I love.
Oh yeah, check that out.
Basically, anytime you see He-Man with an axe, that's what we're aspiring to, because the sword wasn't his main weapon at this point. It was
it's a key, and it doesn't change him into anything. It's the vest that gives him extra power.
Yeah, why would a barbarian need a secret identity? It doesn't make any fucking sense, you know. So that's you know, this was when it was still kind of dangerous.
Yeah. And I love this version of Merman too.
Yeah, just so grotesque. And now they've made toys of all these versions.
Oh yeah.
With the origin one.
I don't believe that they've made a Skeletor that looks like this.
Yeah, not quite. Not quite.
He doesn't look right.
Kind of funny. Yeah, his bare feet, his sort of human-esque type feet. I'm sure they'll get around to it.
Yeah, so you see these computers and like.
Yeah. And a lot of this too was like the secrets of Castle Grayskull, right? So when a
Yeah.
kid got Castle Grayskull, it's like, well, what's in it? What's in there? You know,
Right.
we don't know. It's full of weird stuff. You got to get it to find out.
Blonde here, redhead here.
Yeah. All over the place, you know.
All over the place.
And I love it for it. I love that it's so
I
stylish.
really do too.
Yeah.
So the sword, the two halves of the sword are finally banished for forever. You're never going to see the swords ever again. So, you know, each one of these, I'm not sure if they sort of like, I don't know if the Merman comic came with Merman. I don't really remember how.
Yeah, that was the deal.
Was that the deal?
The character who was sort of most featured would be the one that was in that one.
So who did this come with, I wonder?
That one, I think, was sort of a little bit of a, because there were a few where it didn't quite have to do with the character.
Right.
So I think this might have been like, that was in the wave with, of course, See Many Faces. That may have been with Many Faces, because I don't feel like there was a booklet that really addressed him.
So we got Stratos.
Yeah. You know, the strap suit become a thing again.
Yeah. So these were all really cool, but then I'm going to skip over to this one here.
Yeah,
so
this is one
that
I still managed to have. I had all of these at one time, but somehow I feel like this is, and I have a few of the later ones here handy. And this is sort of like, you know, absolute ephemera, you know? I mean, like, there was no reason to hold on to these by any rational person's mindset, but like, you know, I have a number of these still.
Yeah.
There's the Modulock booklet, you know.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
All the different ways that you can possibly put him together.
Yeah. Yeah. So much fun.
Look at that Skeletor face. Just, oh.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like he's mad because He-Man and his friends keep foiling his plans. He can't get anything right. You know?
She's blonde again. She likes to change her hair color.
And rapidly.
And the funny thing is, you know, after a year of playing with these guys, this is what your He-Man looked like anyway. No weapons, you lost it all.
I was fanatically obsessed about keeping all my stuff in order. I lived in fear of losing He-Man's stuff.
You can see my Skeletor back here. Where is my camera? Back here. And I think that's the one that came with the dragon, you know, armor that shot water.
Yeah,
because it's a hard head.
Yeah.
The original Skeletor's head, you could squish it.
Yeah.
So that's the only one that I have left. But he has I have nothing for him. Oh, I've got it. I found his like loincloth.
Oh,
so part of me wants to track down the pieces, and part of me wants to be like, there's very much a huge part of me that says, Chris, that is a slippery fucking slope.
It's a slippery slope, and it's also, I'll show you something my friend Dave Conover said to me, that I really appreciate and took to heart. He's a guy who's a little bit older than us. He's a definite like old school toy guy. But he said that you get to a point where you just sort of want to collect yourself.
Yeah.
This fun of like, I need to collect myself.
Yes.
And it also is like you collect the things that have meant stuff to you during the course of your life. So you don't really care about the new version of He-Man. You want the thing that was the old thing, or that really reminds you of the old thing, or that you wanted and never got, or that you got and lost, or, you know, what have you.
That really is it.
Right?
You're building a museum to your own, you know, past.
Yeah. That's pretty much what it comes down to. And so hopefully at some point you don't feel like you need it anymore.
I don't know. It's become such a big part of pop culture too. They've figured out that that's what we're doing, and they, you know, inject that nostalgia drug right into us.
Yes. And a lot of it has to do with He-Man and what we're looking at, to the point that the Brian Box Brown, he made this amazing book called The He-Man Effect, because that's really what they can trace it back to. And we happen to be at just the right age for it to really impact our brains and our beings.
This was a cool book. I very much remember this one because Skeletor sort of calls out to his minions, and I remember the ghosts. ghost face of him calling
Right.
it.
I think it must have been my favorite because it is the one that I
Yeah.
still have. I don't know what
Yeah.
the others are. They
And
might
it
still
really
be.
kind of explains who all these people are.
Yeah.
Trapjaw's not a character yet, although I
No,
thought that he was first wave, but I guess not.
no, Trapjaw came out with the next bunch. And the next bunch was still pretty pure too. That's Manny Faces and Trapjaw. I believe Triclops was in that bunch. And that was sort of like as the cartoon was about to come out. And I mean, I remember so many of my core memories have to do with Masters of the Universe stuff. I remember I had two aunts, my dad's two sisters, and we were like at like Sears or Penny's or one of those places.
Yeah.
And there was a table where they just had like a selection, a small selection of the newest Masters of the Universe toys. And that was the first time I saw like Trapjaw, and it was like, what is this? You know, I mean, it was such a big deal, such a big deal.
Her unicorn has lost its horn.
Yeah, right. For this page at least, you know. And Stratos
yeah,
was a character who kind of faded away and went away. I don't think Stratos was ever in the cartoon.
Yeah, you know, I don't think he was either.
Zodak was also similarly kind of not as much. Zodak was basically like Metron. Like,
yeah,
he was like a tweener. You know, he was sort of like on his own side, and he was
because the package I think said Evil Warrior for him, but I always looked at him as a good guy. But he also did have the claw feet.
Yeah, and yeah, anybody who had a hand like this, it meant that they were supposed to maybe be a villain.
I really loved Zodak. He was such a weird one.
Yeah, yeah.
He must have come out in the second wave then too.
No, Zodak was first. The first was He-Man, Teela, Man-at-Arms, Zodak. Those four.
Okay. Really? Wasn't Stratos?
Stratos as well. Well, yeah, I guess Stratos would be a babyface, considered a babyface in that case.
Yeah.
And then Skeletor, Beastman, Merman, Zodak, Stratos. So that would be right. I said that both ways. That was confusing. But yeah, that was the original 8 figures.
Okay.
And then Stratos and Zodak were kind of like, they were mulched more or less. You know, you didn't really hear or see much of them later.
Really? They didn't, yeah. And two of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
And then we get into the mini comics, which we could go into for hours and hours on end.
For sure. But like Ram Man, you know, those guys.
Yeah, here we go. Ram Man, Manny Faces, Trapjaw, Triclops. Then you got Battle Cat.
Yeah.
Yep. So this must be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So Teela was in the first wave.
Yep.
Yep.
Those 8 were the first 8, you know, and they were all, you know, none of them really did anything.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have like some sort of a little trick feature, and then after that they almost always did. So yeah, that's the purest hit, those original 8 figures.
Amazing.
And like, I just remember so many things, man. Like I remember that there was a Thornberries, which became KB here locally. They had a cardboard stand-up at their store at the mall with Manny Faces, and the face would change. It was just like on a motor, and it would just like,
oh, that's really cool.
and I would just stare at it for as long as my parents would let me. And it was like we walked to the mall and then walk back, and it's like, okay, you can go look at it for a minute. It's like just
yeah.
Little Kid Rocko, just like the thing. And it's like, you know, a lot of positive memories, a lot of like negative memories, like times when I was like kind of a brat about things. And
totally.
Like kind of a case of one day it will please us to remember even this, you know, because it was always like, well, you're not going to get that He-Man guy, or, you know, whatever. Or like, you know, I remember that there was a kid next door who somehow she ended up with a Ram Man. And she gave me her Ram Man. I think she as a kid, she probably wanted me to give her something of mine that she wanted. And I was like, I've already got Ram Man. And she was like, well, I want you to have it. So I ended up
with a couple Ram Mans.
Now I have 2 Ram Mans. Whenever I look at it, I kind of feel bad because that kid was like poor and I had everything.
Oh.
Like I was I wasn't a rich kid, but I was I was the only child, and I was the baby of both sides of the family. So I didn't have anything, you know.
Yeah, I was kind of the same deal. Like my brothers were all like going to college by the time I was born, and you know, my parents were much older. You know, they were, you know, and my mom was in her 40s and my dad was in his 50s, and like, and my mom was looking after my, you know, geriatric grandmother. So and dad was at work until I was 12 when he retired. So I was just like running around doing my own thing, and the way that they like kind of kept me, you know, in a space was by like, here's a new toy, here, do this one. I remember the only fight I ever got in with like my best friend growing up. We've known each other since we were 2 years old, and it was over like, no, I don't want to be the bad guys. You're going to be the bad guys today.
Yeah,
and then funny. Like, you know, he stormed out. Like, it's so funny.
I always tend to like, when I think of things that happened when I was a kid, I always have to remind myself that I was also a kid, because I never quite felt like one. I always kind of felt like an adult in a weird way, but I was definitely a child as well, you know? So it's like, oh, I acted like that because I was 3 or 4 or 8 or however old I was, you know, as a little kid. The things we obsess over when we are inclined to obsess. And basically what they did with Masters of the Universe is they weaponized that. And I work in marketing today. I find marketing fascinating, and it all goes back to the same stuff that I was noticing and seeing in a very primal way as a kid, you know? And it's not something, I'm as cynical as I feel like I need to be about it, but at the same time, I feel like these products can really impact our lives in sort of positive ways, you know? I mean, like Warhol here, let me figure this out. Famous Campbell soup can. The deal with that was, you know, if you asked Warhol, he would always be really obtuse about it and be kind of coy about it. When Warhol was a kid, his mother, who was his whole world, he was the youngest of a bunch of siblings. His mother had some sort of cancer and was away for months. They just like sent her to like a hospital where they cut things out of her. And it was up to his next closest brother to look after him and take care of him. And every day for lunch, his brother, with his limited culinary skills, would make him a sandwich and a bowl of Campbell's soup. So to Warhol, for a while, his mom became Campbell's soup.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if he'd reckoned with that or what, but like the most beautiful thing in the world that he could think of to paint was these cans, you know, manufactured in a factory, but we love them just the same. You know, I mean, you've got that, I've got this. Like, it's like, you know, the things that we hold on to that continue to mean something to us. In a way, it's very sad that it was stuff that was made in a factory. But at the same time, once you kind of get over that, it's kind of beautiful in a way.
Sure.
You know, because you can always kind of get it back. We all kind of have a shared experience around it. Differing levels of obsession, obviously. But like, you know, whenever I have a tough time with something, I like to go to McDonald's. That's the ultimate comfort food to me. You know, I was a Happy Meal a Week kid, you know? So it's like, you know, it's a lot of feelings, but it's the pop art. It is the shared cultural experience of our time, and it's hugely important. That's all there is to it.
Absolutely. Well, awesome, man. Well, that was fun flipping through.
Yeah, man, very interesting. And we were initially going to talk about the fantastic Genius Illustrated Alex Toth book, which everybody should get now. It's back in print again.
Yes.
I missed my chance to sell my hardcover for like $800, but I'm glad that it's back in print because people need to have it and see it and own it.
Well, I mean, I got it in paperback, but and I got the first 2 in hardcover, but I missed out on that one, and it's not the same size. So
yeah, a lot of people did. It's weird. To me, that was the one I needed. Was the one with all the animation stuff. That was like, that's like, I have to have that. I mean, I bought that the second it was available.
Yeah. I was more interested in looking at the way that he told stories through comics, and then was going to get it and then just couldn't.
Yeah.
You know, because they weren't cheap books, even when they were you know, from
I would have loved to have had all of them, but I had to choose. And that was a typical choice for me. Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on again. Thanks for talking about that. Everybody knows my love and obsession of Masters of the Universe.
Absolutely.
So.
And I love how you do it too, because what you do is like it's like we looked at. It's like,
right.
Who is this? What is this? Any kid can choose, you know? And
Yeah.
I mean, that's also a big part of what the problem with Star Wars is, because I always say when people are like, why don't I like the sequels, and why do they not like the sequels, and what's going on? And I always say, because Star Wars was more exciting when it was about possibilities than when it was about explanations, right?
I agree 100%. That's the same sentiment that I feel.
Right.
Yep.
And the trap they set for themselves is that Star Wars toys, the kind of Star Wars toys, were as much about established characters as they were about, like, I don't know, what the Hammerhead, Walrus face.
All the ancillary characters in the background.
Like, right. And what is this? They don't even know. They don't even fucking know.
Right.
Like, they just made a mask for a guy to be in the background that became a toy. And that's what we just looked at was bonkers. Like, as a kid, to be like, this is the story of He-Man. It's like, you're a kid, you know, you're already going to have a hard time following some big story, but we're just going to give you the broad strokes, you know?
Yep. Take it from there.
You know, and it's something.
And it's one of the few things that's left that you can, you know, major properties that's left that you can kind of do that with.
Yeah. You know? Yeah. But you have to ignore a lot of stuff.
You do. It's true.
Very cool. Well, great talking about this, especially, and I'm glad to get this off my chest.
Absolutely. All right. Well, take care.
Absolutely. You too, Chris. Thanks a lot.
All right. Bye. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my Patreon, where at the $3 level, I'll send you my sketchbook, The Sketch of the Masters, and at the $5 level, I'll send you the sketchbook plus my mini stories, not Man Nor Beast, but Moss, Stench of the Sea, and The Voyeur. At the $8 level, after a year, you'll get a commission. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter in the show notes. Check out my store, where I have lots of original art. And you can also buy books like Lost Angels, a sci-fi YA adventure about a girl who has to solve a mystery in a crashed alien city. Spectral, a showcase of fear, is about a sinister puppet master who travels from town to town telling tales to children who may never sleep again. You can request a commission at any time just by contacting me. Here is a list of the upcoming conventions that I'll be at the time that this video was released. And don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the video. Again, thanks for watching.